Lisbon's hospitals are under pressure day and night. The number of new COVID-19 cases is so high, ambulances have to queue to even access hospitals. The patients are diagnosed inside the vehicles. Hospital directors have called on people not to come unless strictly necessary.
Temos que pedir neste momento duas coisas à população. A primeira é que, antes de utilizar serviços de saúde, faça uma análise correta dos seus sintomas e pense que, se os sintomas são ligeiros, não deve vir para hospital.
In the first months of the pandemic, Portugal managed to keep infection cases low compared with other EU countries. But since Christmas and an easing of restrictions, figures have jumped. The worst surge in the world these past 2 weeks. It seems the more infectious British variant of the disease is one reason the pandemic is spreading so fast.
A variante inglesa do vírus surgiu e propagou-se vertiginosamente, abarcando mais de 50% dos casos em áreas como a Grande Lisboa. O número de mortes cresce a ritmo há meses inimaginável.
To bring the pandemic under control, Portugal has tightened its lockdown, schools remain shut, and people are asked to work from home. Now, non-essential traveling abroad by air, land, and sea is banned too.
Well, Caitlin, there are a number of variants that we're concerned about, and one that is quite well established already in the United States, and that is the 117 that is in about 28 or 29 states and more than 315 cases that have all been reported. As you alluded to, the fact is that when you have a virus that has ability to transmit more efficiently than the wild type in the community, sooner or later, by pure viral dynamics itself, it will become more dominant than the wild type. So we have that already there. We have a situation where there have now been reported in very specific places in South Carolina, for example, the isolate or the mutant that is the 351 from dominant in South Africa. Again, that seems to have a very good fitness for spread. So whether or not that's going to ultimately take over in the sense of being dominant is unclear by now. The projection that is made with regard to the UK is that probably by the end of March, the beginning of April, it actually will become more dominant in this country. As I mentioned at the very end of my remarks, I'll leave it to, in a moment, to Dr. Walensky to talk a bit about what we're doing from a surveillance and other standpoint. But the fundamental principle of getting people vaccinated as quickly and as efficiently as you possibly can will always be the best way to prevent the further evolution of any mutant, because when you do that, you prevent replication, and replication is essential for mutation. So over to you, Dr. Walensky.
As the coronavirus continues to wreak havoc globally, concerns over vaccine disparity across the world are also intensifying. Those concerns are part of the reasons why President Joe Biden is bringing the U.S. back into the World Health Organization vaccine initiative, COVAX. The president's decision to help donate vaccines to poor countries reverses former President Trump's America First approach. This all comes as America is struggling through its own vaccine challenges. In a statement last week, WHO's Director General called out the lack of vaccine equity, stating it's, quote, not right that younger, healthier adults in rich countries are vaccinated before health workers and older people in poor countries, warning of a, quote, catastrophic moral failure. With more on the reality of the global vaccine inequity and calls for people's vaccine, we're joined by Oxfam America Senior Advisor Nico Luciani. Nico, so Oxfam has analyzed the deals that pharmaceutical corporations and vaccine producers have struck with nations around the world, and it found that parts of the world's population are likely to not have a vaccine until at least 2022. So what more can you tell us about this possibility?
Well, I think what the WHO is signaling is really important. This could be one of the biggest moral catastrophes of our lifetime. We're seeing a slow roll out in the US and Europe, already causing lots of frustrations, as you saw in the streets of Europe, here in the United States. But putting this a little bit into perspective, rich countries and some relatively rich countries have received, around 70 million doses so far administered into arms. If you look into the lowest income countries, you have 55 people to date. Not 55,000, not 55 million, but 55 people have received a vaccine to date. That even shocked me, and I've been tracking these things for months.
Oggi, anniversario della liberazione del campo di sterminio di Auschwitz, si celebra la giornata della memoria. Commemoriamo le vittime della Shoah e tutte le persone perseguitate e deportate dal regime nazista. Ricordare è un'espressione di umanità. Ricordare è segno di civiltà. Ricordare è condizione per un futuro migliore di pace e di fraternità. Ricordare anche e stare attenti, perché queste cose possono succedere un'altra volta, incominciando le proposte ideologiche che vogliono salvare un popolo e finendo distruggendo un popolo e l'umanità. State attenti a come è incominciata questa strada di morte, di sterminio, di brutalità.
President Biden signed a batch of executive actions Wednesday as his administration marks one full week in office. The White House has been focusing on one or two issues a day, starting with the pandemic, manufacturing, racial equality, and immigration. Wednesday's theme was climate. Mr. Biden signed a series of executive actions earlier to combat climate change, freezing new oil and gas leases on public lands and offshore waters, quote, wherever possible, and establishing climate as a key element of U.S. foreign policy and national security. President Biden emphasized the need to act quickly and cast the issue as one that can boost the economy as well.
In my view, we've already waited too long to deal with this climate crisis. We can't wait any longer. We see it with our own eyes, we feel it, we know it in our bones. And it's time to act. And it's not time for small measures. We need to be bold. So let me be clear. That includes helping revitalize the economies of coal, oil, and gas and power plant communities. We have to start by creating new good-paying jobs, capping those abandoned wells, reclaiming mines, turning old brownfield sites into new hubs of economic growth, creating new good-paying jobs in those communities where those workers live, because they help build this country.
It's become something of a ritual for new U.S. presidents.
Basically, the best way to describe them, to undo the damage Trump has done. I'm not initiating any new law, any new aspect of the law.
Joe Biden has signed an executive order reinstating U.S. foreign aid to overseas NGOs that offer any counseling on abortion. The ban was brought in by former President Donald Trump during his first days in office.
Next is the policy in regard to Mexico City.
Alternatively called the Mexico City policy or the global gag rule, depending on which side of the fence you sit on abortion. The policy has swung back and forth between Republican and Democratic presidents since it was first enacted under Ronald Reagan. The rule initially applied only to family planning funds, but Trump took it a step further, applying it to all U.S. health aid. He was also the first president to attend the annual anti-abortion March for Life. Biden's order comes on the eve of this year's event, which has been moved online and has elicited a fierce reaction from American anti-abortion groups. Biden is a devout Catholic, but he's consistently supported the 1973 Supreme Court decision that guaranteed a woman's right to choose. After the president's announcement, Secretary of State Antony Blinken said the United States will also withdraw from the 2020 Geneva Consensus Declaration. a statement of opposition to abortion signed by some 30 countries like Brazil, Hungary and Saudi Arabia. International rights groups have welcomed Biden's orders. UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres calling it a powerful message to women and girls around the world that their rights matter.
These protesters say they're marching for freedom and equality. They want women to have the right to choose what's best for their bodies and their babies.
The court ruling means I don't want to have any more children for the moment in Poland because I want to have the choice. I do not want to run the risk of having to watch my baby die in excruciating pain or have a stillborn.
Poland's constitutional court ruled in October to ban abortions in cases of fetal disorders, even those that are severe or fatal, a ruling which came into force on Wednesday. It's one of the most restrictive laws in Europe, only allowing the procedure in cases of rape and incest, or if the mother's life is at risk. Doctors performing illegal abortions will face a prison sentence.
Women should have the right to decide their own bodies, not the government and certainly not the church.
Activists accuse the governing Conservative Law and Justice Party of putting pressure on the court, which it denies. But that hasn't stopped anger over the ruling escalating into the largest protest movement in decades. In the capital, Warsaw, there were scuffles with police, who fired tear gas at the crowds. Some say the security forces are trying to intimidate them into keeping quiet.
It's a tragedy for our country that 30 years after the fall of communism, we have to fight for our freedom again.
The protests are being watched closely half a world away in Argentina. Women there gained a victory last month when the Senate voted to allow abortion up to 14 weeks, the largest South American country to do so. Activists say they're sharing strategies online.
The fact that we are a reference in terms of empowerment and the building of strength is very exciting. I think that if we could get on a plane and we would be on the front line with them, supporting them.
The green scarves that became the symbol of Argentina's abortion rights movement are being handed out in Poland as a source of inspiration, a reminder not to give up.
You will do impartial justice according to the Constitution and laws. So help you God.
Shortly after senators took oaths to convene the court of impeachment against defendant Donald Trump, accused of inciting an insurrection, a test vote on how the chamber may decide the case in February. It came at the request of Republican Senator Rand Paul, a Trump ally, who argued the trial should end before it even begins because Trump is no longer in office.
This proceeding, which would try a private citizen and not a president, a vice president, or civil officer, violates the Constitution.
Democrats called that argument ludicrous.
The theory that the impeachment of a former official is unconstitutional is flat out wrong by every frame of analysis: constitutional context, historical practice, precedent, and basic common sense.
In this vote, the ayes are 55. The nays are 45.
And the vote tally on the motion was in favor of proceeding with the trial. But for Democrats, it was a hollow victory. Only 5 Republicans joined them in opposing an immediate end to the trial, far short of the 17 Republican votes needed later for a conviction. Minority Leader Mitch McConnell was among the 45 Senate Republicans now on record for opposing the trial, a reversal from his earlier position of being open to conviction. While Trump is the first former U.S. president to be tried after leaving office, he is not the first U.S. official. Nearly 150 years ago, a U.S. Secretary of War resigned and then was later put on trial for impeachment. The Senate then was asked, just as it was now, whether proceeding with the trial was constitutional, and they too answered yes. But then the War Secretary was acquitted, with enough senators citing concerns that they lacked jurisdiction to convict. It appears Trump's fate may be headed in the same direction, despite Democrats' arguments he should be convicted and disqualified from holding office in the future.
We have a president who incited a violent attack on the United States Capitol and on our very democracy. So it's absolutely critical that we call that out and make sure that future presidents understand that this is completely unacceptable behavior.
The impeachment against Trump will now move behind closed doors for the next 2 weeks before arguments return to the Senate floor on February 9th.
Puerto Rico has declared a state of emergency over gender-based violence. Newly sworn-in Governor Pedro Pierluisi signed the executive order on Sunday to address a wave of killings targeting women and transgender people on the island. The order will be in effect until June 30th of 2022. The emergency declaration makes good on one of his key campaign promises. Sierra Ortiz Blanes is a reporter for the Miami Herald and El Nuevo Herald. She has been following the latest developments from Puerto Rico. So this measure is somewhat unusual. Why was an emergency declared to combat gender violence on the island? It's risen to that level.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me on today. So Puerto Rico has a high rate of femicides. A study from Kilómetro Cero and Proyecto Madria, which are two island-based rights groups, found that one woman is killed every 7 days on the island. For years now, women's groups and anti-violence collectives, have taken the streets, organized to push for this emergency declaration. So Pedro Pierluisi, the current governor, who's been in power for less than a month, promised in his campaign and platform that he would declare a state of emergency, which proposes a series of long-ranging initiatives that allocate funding and government resources to address gender violence on the island.
At the end of the street lies the border separating Cameroon from the Central African Republic. The barrier's closed, tightly guarded by Cameroon's armed forces. But Central Africans, fleeing the violence, are still able to make their way across. Most of them end up staying in camps such as this one in Gado, set up 30 kilometres after the border. But workers are struggling to take in the many who've already made it here.
L'attribution des abris tient compte de la taille de famille.
Maurice Moussouravi and his team from the United Nations Human Rights Office are battling to accommodate thousands of refugees. They've set up 300 new tents, but they doubt this will be enough after violence resumed following the outcome of the presidential election.
Nous avons, depuis les derniers événements survenus en RCA, nous avons enregistré plus de 5000 personnes. Nous conjuguons tous nos efforts pour pouvoir soulager tant ça peut la souffrance de cette population déjà vulnérable.
Vanessa, a young disabled woman, together with her two daughters, are among the latest to make it to the camp. They're part of the 270 Central Africans who fled their villages near the town of Bois, a regular target for rebel groups. A few kilometres away, the Cameroonian armies patrolling the no man's land between the two countries.
Blue Sky fait son entrée dans le dispositif. L'inspection commence par Golf, les postes Golf, Golf 1, Golf 2, Golf 3.
Under the orders of Colonel Ve, they're looking out for any signs the violence could be heading towards the border and preparing to stop rebels from trying to destabilise the country. In the last months, several rebels have managed to make it through, led by armed groups patrolling on the other side of the border.
Sango, quelle est la situation de ton poste?
The rebels are trying to close in on the country's capital, Bangui, by setting up blockades, some as far out as the border.
Les rebelles se sont donné deux objectifs, faire tomber Bangui et contrôler la main supply road, c'est-à-dire le grand corridor qui part de Garoua-Boulaye jusqu'à Bangui. Et la poussée des rebelles a fait que nous venions jeter ces dispositifs fermes. Et c'est comme ça qu'on a donc pu stopper l'avancée des rebelles. Et le dispositif est, comme vous le voyez,
The road is vital for the Central African Republic. It's an economic axe linking the landlocked country to Cameroon. Attacks along the road have caused havoc to trade. It's too dangerous to drive all the way to Bangui. And with the border now closed, hundreds of lorry drivers are stuck, waiting for the barrier to reopen.
On ne mange même pas bien. Regarde comment on prépare ici.
Over 800 drivers have been stuck on this wasteland for over a month, with food stocks running low and goods going bad on the back of their lorries. They're getting worried. Aubin hasn't heard from his family back in the Central African Republic since the violence broke out.
Nous sommes des transporteurs, on n'est même pas dans la politique. Mais ce qui passe maintenant sur notre route, on ne sait même pas. On n'a aucune information de nos familles là-bas maintenant. On ne sait même pas comment ils vivent là-bas. On est bloqué, on est dépassé même.
On the other side, there's a small glimmer of hope as guards briefly open the border, letting 30 lorry drivers back into Cameroon. And business owners in the trade hub of Garoua-Boulet are also suffering from the consequences of the closure. Central Africans account for 98% of their customers, and sales came to a sudden standstill when the violence broke out on the other side of the border. Samson Timan is struggling to sell his stocks of women's fashion accessories, and he says he's lost 2 months' worth of revenue since the violence resumed in December.
Voici il y a presque 9 heures, il n'y a personne au marché. Et comme ça depuis le 18 décembre. Il y a encore le stock qu'on a pris en décembre qui est encore bloqué sur place. Si vous faites même un tour dans la ville, vous allez constater que tout est mort. La ville de Garoua vit à cause des Centrafricains. Et quand c'est bloqué là-bas, nous on ne travaille pratiquement rien ici. Vraiment, c'est compliqué.
It's a constant worry for shopkeepers here. If the violence isn't kept under control, their situation will quickly worsen too. The United Nations Refugee Agency says that at least 60,000 Central Africans have already fled to one of their neighbouring countries.
Tension on the streets of Myanmar this week as the country braces for a possible political crisis.
We're not saying the military will take power, but we're not saying it won't either.
This was the moment that it all began. In a press conference on Tuesday, military spokesperson Zormin Tun refused to rule out the possibility of a coup. The following day, military chief Min Aung Hlaing stoked fears when he said the constitution should be repealed if it was not abided by. The comments follow weeks of complaints from the military of voter fraud in November's election and demands for an investigation.
The military is forcing the UEC and the government that, hey, no. You can't just ignore us. We are the stakeholder. We have obligations. We are the guardian to the Constitution. So this is a major message the military is trying to send it to the government and also the international communities.
Fear escalated after reports of an increasing security presence and sightings of armoured vehicles being moved around various cities. As tensions reached their peak on Saturday, the military issued a new statement saying the Commander-in-Chief's comments had been misinterpreted. But just hours later, emboldened by rumours, hundreds of protesters gathered in Yangon at a pro-military rally where speeches welcomed a coup with support of the people.
Protests like this have been happening on an almost daily basis over the last few weeks. While they have been gaining attention, they failed to draw the numbers for what would be considered a show of popular support. But this crowd is gaining confidence, and it's stoking fear in the community.
As the pressure builds, there have been violent attacks on NLD supporters watching on. The NLD say accusations of voter fraud are just being used as an excuse to sow fear.
Senior General Min Aung Hlaing is making the NLD scared and making the people scared. His main intention is to extend his senior general position.
Military Chief Min Aung Hlaing is due to retire in July and may be fearful of losing power. Although imminent action from the military now appears less likely, tension remains high as relations between the civilian government and the military reach an all-time low. Ali Fowl, Al Jazeera, Yangon.
I want to turn now to our correspondent in Moscow, Theo Mertz. He's out in the cold covering the protests there. Theo, we understand that more than 1,000 people have been arrested today across the country. What's the situation where you are?
Well,
Well, it's a very strange game of cat and mouse between the protesters and the authorities here. As soon as the organisers say they're going to rally in one part of Moscow, the police move in to shut it down. So at the start of the day, they said they were going to meet at Lubyanka Square at the headquarters of the FSB. That was completely closed. The whole centre of Moscow was completely closed. Some really strange scenes, empty city centre on a Sunday afternoon. Then it was moved to another spot. Authorities closed it down. Then it was moved to where I'm standing now, just outside several train stations. Just a few minutes ago, this was completely full of people. The march was going through here. Police moved in to shut it down again. And now it's moved on to another point. So it's very, very difficult to say how many people are actually out here. Certainly in the thousands. There have been streets full of people. There have been squares full of people. But authorities are just making it completely impossible for them to gather. And that's obviously the intention. So we don't have the scenes like we had last week when there were tens of thousands of people out in one place, very packed. Those images of police beating protesters, mass arrests. As you say, there have been mass arrests today. There have been batons used, but it's very difficult to get a proper sense of what's going on here.
Robinhood Online Brokerage has been one of the hottest venues for investors in retail trading. Now, it's a target of disgruntled customers, celebrities, and politicians.
Here's the latest, and that's Robinhood.
Shares in the U.S. store GameStop were down until a chat group on Reddit recently banded together to buy stocks. That sent the company skyrocketing, undercutting major hedge funds who were shorting the stock. But on Thursday, those shares tanked after Robinhood restricted purchases of new stocks of GameStop. On top of that, Robinhood also blocked new trades in several other companies, including AMC, BlackBerry, and Nokia, which were also soaring because of the chat group. Users on the app can still close out positions, but can't buy more.
Adapt or die.
Blogger Dave Portnoy says Robinhood can't just try to block online trends simply because they don't favor traditional trading.
There's no way to foresee that. That's why I think these people have to go to jail. Like, if you can just pick up and change the rules at a whim, whenever you feel like it, like, why can't a bank, if I make a deposit, just say, that's our money now?
Hey, uninstall Robinhood. Get it off your phone.
Many investors who made it big on GameStop and other blocked companies are furious.
Hedge funds, they have a big stake in Robinhood, and they get to tell them what to do, and, that's not right. They're screwing us over, and we're angry.
But the CEO of Robinhood says he is doing his customers a favor.
We absolutely did not do this at the direction of any market maker or hedge fund or anyone we route to or other market participants. So we're really in unprecedented times. And in order to protect the firm and protect our customers, we had to limit buying in these stocks.
This user on Twitter said, "This is my portfolio when Robinhood decides to protect me." Other investors who buy stocks based on internet trends feel the same way.
Stocks that, by the way, I invested in because I believe in the internet, I believe in Wall Street Bets, I believe in Reddit, and I believe that they would go up because I believe in the power of that. And you can't cry foul if you're too dumb to realize the power of the internet.
The fallout even caused two U.S. political adversaries to band together. Democrat Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez says she supported a hearing to investigate Robinhood's actions. Republican Ted Cruz tweeted, saying he fully agrees.
It's Sotheby's for the Botticelli, $80 million. It's yours. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you so much.
One of only around a dozen portraits by Botticelli known to survive today. The Italian Renaissance artist's young man holding a roundel sold for $92 million, including fees, on Thursday. It shows an unknown young man, likely a member of Florence's elite in the late 15th century. Sotheby's said it was one of the most significant and valuable portraits of any period ever to appear at auction.
When I just stand in front of this painting, it gives me such great pleasure still. It still takes my breath away. It has a force that is just astounding.